I think the main takeaways so far is that we can improve performance in a few ways. So we can increase our stroke volume, have a nicely efficiently beating heart to send a lot of blood around the body really quickly. Or we can
because that's like the top. If we think, we breathe in, we're always breathing. So if we can be more efficient at the air we breathe in and getting all of that oxygen and getting rid of CO2 and water to the working muscle, that's going to make us better athlete. And then the next step down is really the O2 utilization.
Yeah, so cardiac output, obviously, if we can kind of combine these, this is one of the main limiters on aerobic ability. So we can send more blood and we can use more oxygen, and that's two of the ways that we can become more fit. We can also increase our glycogen stores. This is because we know that we need to use glycogen, which is the stored form of glucose when we're racing. And if we're able to store more of that, we could potentially increase our ability to go harder for longer.
That's right. The anaerobic supply or aerobic supply of ATP in a fast, efficient manner. And, we can measure these. This is kind of how we've figured this out. But is that really practical?
Right. So this photo of Will, this is from a few years ago doing some of our mountain bike research. And I don't know how expensive was this thing. Not many labs have these.
That'd be at least 20,000, 30,000, I think.
Yeah, so just measuring how much oxygen you're using, how much CO2 you're breathing out, so we can see how much energy you're using and how efficient you are at doing that and what energy system you're using. So that's a great way to do it. It was a pain in the butt and expensive. It's not practical for us at all.
The data, though. Cool.
Oh, it's super cool. But we know that works from all the research done back in the day because of this photo from, I think it's A.V. Hill, who kind of did the original research on oxygen uptake. Because we know that a certain amount of revolution per minute on these cycle ergometers was a certain amount of work. And what they noticed is that a certain amount of work took a certain amount of oxygen. So now what we do is we take that to the trails or out on the road or in the lab with Will, and we're able to see what energy system he's using, and then we can prescribe training based on that. So that's cool.
Instead, yeah.
But we don't do that. So what we started to use was heart rate monitors back in the 80s, or I don't know. I wasn't training then, but I did use a heart rate monitor, and I was around when power meters came out. And so heart rate was measuring your response to a certain power output or certain exercise. And heart rate's a little slow to respond. So when power meters finally came out, we were able to measure the exact workload and what you're doing, get an idea of what you're doing with your muscles when you're training.
And yeah, in combination, we got heart rate, and along with heart rate introduced zones. And then, but still there was we weren't 100% sure of the work we were doing, because Matt, it could be 40 degrees Celsius, like 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and with this really high heart rate, does that mean we were outputting the same power or running at the same speed? No, we know that wasn't the case. So there's times at which heart rate is really beneficial, but then we got power, and that just kind of, slowly actually, Matt, blew people's minds.
Yeah, and for a long time, no one really knew what to do with a power meter.
Yeah, and so with this slide, this is the progression and what we consider the ways in which we can measure things, and the hierarchy of which you should use these measurements. Speed, Matt, we know, if it's a headwind and you're going uphill, speed's not that relevant.
No, so
if it's a tailwind and you're going downhill, how are you going to judge your intensity?
So speed's a result of kind of external factors and what you're doing with your body. So it's not that great.
But then on top of that, we can lay heart rate. And now we know. Great. You're going, this is the response to the work you're doing. But then power. And Matt, this is interesting because this is actually a running file of mine in a 32K trail race. Right, it took about 2.5 hours, I think. So where heart rate is, it's a great measure, but at the start we had this massive climb. You can see that in the grey. Huge climb. I knew what my heart rate needed to be at, but I also knew at the start it wasn't going to get immediately there. So if I had relied on heart rate and got it straight up to around 175 to 180 was the point I was looking at. If I'd gone straight there, I would have been actually working at a far higher rate. And I know this because I had power. See the pink line? Power was super constant all the way up that climb. My speed dropped. The green line got slower and slower and slower as the climb got steeper and steeper and steeper. And as my physiological system caught up to the requirements of the output that I was doing, my heart rate response started to supply more muscle. Some of my muscles got fatigued. I needed a greater rate of supply of oxygen. I sweated. My stroke volume started to decrease. My heart rate increased to match at a certain point. Can't remember what that was, maybe around 30 minutes or so, my actual output. But right from the outset, Matt, I had power, so I knew what, a good, really accurate representation of the metabolic cost of what I was doing.
Yeah, this is great for me because I think a power meter is the best way to train and the best way to pace yourself. And what we can see with your power output is it's nice and steady. Your heart rate responded nicely, but speed would have been pretty useless. So that's awesome.